there is a fine line between heroic purpose and grandiosity, between serving others and serving ourselves. How do we know if we are really acting to better the world around us, or merely to inflate our own ego?
What if a child dreamed of becoming something other than what society had intended? What if a child aspired to something greater?
Then you become something else entirely.
Which is?
A legend, Mr. Wayne.
Though certainly not an exclusively male issue, in so many of our stories there is a specific type of heroism that is generally associated with men, or at the very least is generally seen as a masculine trait. For the purpose of this video, let's call it the myth of heroic masculine purpose, a specific set of characteristics and beliefs regarding masculinity and morality that is not only repeated throughout countless popular stories, but that has also seeped into the ideological structures of many male-dominated subcultures, and has undoubtedly affected the private minds of many men, myself included. On the surface, this is no surprise, because, as we shall discuss, it has some genuinely inspirational qualities. It promotes virtue and offers the kind of meaning that so many men today seem to desire. But there's a dark side to it as well, one that is all too often and all too easily overlooked. One that turns service into selfishness, purpose into delusion, and responsibility into detachment. And given how, according to the analytics, 85% of my audience is male anyways, I figured I'd make one for the boys. So men, let's gather around. Let's take a critical look at our heroic masculine purpose. What is it? What does it really communicate to us? And how do we let it shape our connection with the world, for better and for worse? Let's take a look at Part 1. The Man of Heroic Masculine Purpose. I was a teenager when Casino Royale came out, and right from the opening set piece, it was clear that we were dealing with a new type of Bond. Gone was Mr. Gentleman. This was a pure weapon for blunt force trauma. For me though, the real character-defining moment for this 007 came right here. A terrorist tries to blow up an airplane, but Bond chases after him and, with little regard to his own life and body, manages to stop him in the nick of time. He gets out of the truck and is immediately beaten down by the police, who see him as the perpetrator. Yet he doesn't protest, he doesn't say anything, he doesn't have to, because to him, there's only one thing that matters. He won.
I knew it was too early to promote you.
Well, I understand 00s have a very short life expectancy, so your mistake will be short-lived.
Daniel Craig's James Bond wasn't just a grittier, more brutish version of the ones that came before. He was a distillation of the very essence of the character, a man completely devoted to the singular higher purpose of protecting our world. Everything else came secondary, even his own life.
People need dramatic examples to shake them out of apathy, and I can't do that as Bruce Wayne.
Around that same time, we were also presented with Iron Man and Christopher Nolan's Batman, which, besides pretty much jump-starting the superhero craze we're still experiencing today, gave my teenage self two more heroic men to look up to. Both saw evil in the world and both took it upon themselves to do something about it with an almost obsessive dedication.
There is nothing except this. There's no art opening, there is no benefit, there is nothing to sign. There is the next mission, and nothing else.
There are of course many other stories with male heroes like these, but to me these were the purest embodiments of the man with heroic masculine purpose. A man of absolute responsibility, one who is willing to carry the heaviest burden, and to make the ultimate sacrifice in the service of others and for the good of the world.
You don't owe these people anymore. You've given them everything.
Not everything. Not yet.
He has all the best parts of the gospel of Jordan Peterson.
You want to take on the heaviest load that you can conceive of, that you might be able to move, because it gives your life nobility and purpose.
He is David Data's superior man, a man whose mission is always his first priority, who is connected to the world with his very core, thereby generating a passion that also happens to make him a ravishing lover. It is interesting to consider how these particular men are all men of high status and wealth, Tony Stark and Bruce Wayne are both billionaires, and while James Bond may not have such extravagant capital, he has nevertheless always been an icon of style and luxury. Even in Casino Royale, where Daniel Craig gave us a Bond who is more rough around the edges, and who doesn't care if his martini is shaken or stirred. He can still assimilate himself to the so-called high life if he wants to.
Dry martini.
Oui, monsieur.
Wait. 3 measures of Gordon's, 1 of vodka, half a measure of Quina Lily. Shake it over rice and then add a thin slice of lemon peel.
Yes, sir.
I'm pretty sure this was meant as a sort of de-romanticization of the Bond character, but actually it only emphasized what makes him such an effective embodiment of heroic masculine purpose. For it demonstrated that he not only has wealth, status, style and reputation, he also has no attachment to it. To him all these things are trivial in the context of his mission, of his highest purpose. The same goes for Tony Stark and Bruce Wayne. Both of them have it all, and both of them couldn't really care less, and would sacrifice it all without blinking if need be, thereby once more proving that they are absolutely committed to their heroic masculine purpose, and that they are worthy of our utmost admiration. Except... Part 2. Detachment from reality as the road to escapist fantasy. I first read David Data's The Way of the Superior Man when I was about 20 years old, and back then I found it really inspiring. I wouldn't say it was the defining book on masculinity, but it did articulate much of why I felt so drawn to all these heroic men. In fact, my guess is that a lot of the writing was actually inspired by such stories, rather than by, real scientific research. But anyways, here was a book urging me to look beyond the trivial and the fleeting, to find my true calling in life. Know your deepest purpose, give the gift you were born to give, Data wrote. It seemed to pierce right through all the nonsense of life, to encourage us to reclaim some lost sense of responsibility, to rediscover our heroic masculine purpose. Though the book notes how it's about masculinity as a form of energy and only uses the terms man and woman as a shorthand, I think it nevertheless attracted primarily men, and particularly the generation of men who had outgrown or been disillusioned by the macho masculinity of the 80s action heroes, but who hadn't really found a new direction yet.
We're the middle children of history, man. No purpose or place.
One reason why The Way of the Superior Man was such a popular book is because it was rather vague with its language, which allowed men like myself to project their own meaning onto it. It had to do this actually, because as the book itself notes on multiple occasions, every man's purpose, gift and talent is unique. Every man has his own mission. The point of the book is not to tell you what your purpose is, but to encourage you to figure it out for yourself. And while I do not believe this is a problematic thing in itself, and while I still think the book has some insightful reflections on struggling with failure and insecurities, and on the importance of living with honesty and an open heart, reading it today there is something weird too about the constant repetition of a man's purpose, of his gift, his love and his mission. Just take a look at some of these quotes. Unless you know your mission and have aligned your life to it, your core will feel empty. Every man knows that his highest purpose in life cannot be reduced to any particular relationship. If a man prioritizes his relationship over his highest purpose, he weakens himself. Most men's ultimate reason for doing anything has to do with discovering their deepest truth, enjoying total freedom and love, and giving their fullest gifts. Without knowing his life purpose, a man lives a weakened, impotent existence. Take care of the children and the house as much as you want. Just remember that if you give up your true purpose to do so for too long, you are not really helping anyone. The thing that bothers me has to do with the way this heroic masculine purpose is framed. The way it is conceptualized, even if the intent is for men to project their own meaning onto it. What it seems to suggest is that there is an essence to manhood that is completely detached from everything else, that stands apart from all external elements, and subsequently seems to insist that a man's main focus should be on reconciling this nebulous essence with every other facet of his life, like some superhero alter ego. And so even though it encourages healthy connection, it also rather uncritically assumes there is something distinct in the first place.
Know your limits, Master Wayne.
That man has no limits.
Well, you do, sir.
This disconnect between heroic masculine purpose and everything else is also reflected in the stories we have been discussing, and might be where the whole idea comes from. Spoilers for No Time to Die, but towards the very end of that movie, Bond gets infected with some kind of virus designed to target the woman he loves and the child they have together. He was already mortally wounded, and it was already pretty clear that he wasn't going to make it out of this one. And yet there was this extra emphasis on the fact that, no matter the outcome of this particular fight, he was never going to have a happy ending. And that is because his heroic masculine purpose also makes him a fundamentally tragic hero. Just like the old gunslingers going off into the sunset once the fight is over, he too is a protector of a world he himself cannot inhabit.
This was your choice.
The same is true for our other heroes, whose fulfillment of their ultimate purpose comes with the ultimate price. Just look at how Tony Stark was destined to die as the fate of the world rested entirely upon his eventual sacrifice.
Went forward in time to view alternate futures, to see all the possible outcomes of the coming conflict.
How many did we win?
One.
And while Bruce Wayne is given a happier ending, he did, in the end, have to sacrifice both of his identities and spend the rest of his life in anonymous exile. For these characters, it is clearly one or the other. A normal life like everyone else, or a life of heroic masculine purpose. They cannot have both.
There was no other way.
And while there definitely is a tragic aspect to this trade-off, albeit one that tends to make us feel even more in awe of these men, there is a liberating quality to it as well that also makes it kind of appealing. Because... Part 3. Heroic men die, but they don't do laundry.
Bats are nocturnal. Bats may be, but even for billionaire playboys, 3 o'clock is pushing it.
While heroic masculine purpose means taking on a great burden, it also means being freed from many others. Characters like Bond, Iron Man or Batman may be fated to exist outside of the world they protect, but in doing so they are also freed from the responsibilities that come from actually having to live within it. And as such, their heroic masculine purpose becomes, to some extent, an escapist fantasy.
I want you to take your ego out of the equation.
To be fair, this is often presented as a point of conflict for them, especially with the other characters who tend to bemoan our heroes for being irresponsible, for being reckless, rude and negligent.
We're not drinking, we're working right now. And you are constitutionally incapable of being responsible.
But all this is usually portrayed with a certain playfulness, sometimes even as comic relief. And this is where the escapism truly comes in, for by heightening all the meaningful, fulfilling and generally cool things about following your heroic masculine purpose, and by playing down the real toll this takes on your relations and community, we remain identified with the heroes, and by extension with the idealized view of heroic masculine purpose. Because from this point of view, as we've seen, we are allowed not to care about these trivialities. Our heroes, after all, are too important. They have their mission, their purpose, their gift. Obviously they don't care about office meetings, they don't care about buying groceries or doing laundry. Those are all lesser concerns. On top of that, to really make the fantasy complete, in the end our heroes are often redeemed for their behavior as all the other characters eventually come around to them. The women who didn't care for them at first now go to bed with them. And the frustration of other men turns into reluctant respect, or even envy, which to us watching these stories once more reaffirms that ultimately there is nothing more desirable, nothing more admirable than a man following his heroic masculine purpose.
You want to hear this or not?
The extent to which stories like these romanticize heroic masculine purpose for me became painfully obvious in the first season of True Detective, in which we were introduced to Rust Cohle, a detective who shares a similar heroic masculine purpose as those other heroes. He is single-mindedly focused on his job to safeguard the world from evil. He is smart, capable, and confident.
When you reach a certain age, you know who you are. I know who I am.
But his relation to those around him looked completely different. His philosophical rantings didn't come off as charmingly witty, but mostly just as plain weird. Sometimes even a little disturbing.
I can do terrible things to people with impunity.
Instead of the life of the party, he was rather dull and he could be a genuine encumbrance for others. And as the years pass, he ends up alone. He is not secretly admired, nor secretly envied. He is probably barely thought about at all. Despite all this, however, Roscoe is still a beloved character to many men. And although this is probably because of his provocative philosophical outlook, I think it is also because no matter how poorly his character is perceived by others, we know what he's really up to. We know his true purpose.
World needs bad men. We keep the other bad men from the door.
There is a part of this that just plays into daydreaming about being cooler than you really are, at least in the eyes of others. I'm sure you have done it, I certainly have. It's also why so many men enjoy movies like John Wick or Nobody, or shows like Breaking Bad, stories about seemingly ordinary men with seemingly ordinary lives, yet to also have a secret life that is filled with heroic masculine purpose.
Deep down, I always knew it was a facade.
A secret life in which they are skilled, dangerous, respected and admired.
It's not what you did, son. It's who you did it to.
It might even be a bit of a coping mechanism too for men who feel their lives are not as exciting or purposeful as they would have wanted, and who feel they themselves are not as respected or admired as they would have hoped, and who can subsequently indulge themselves in the "if only they knew who I really was" kind of attitude that these stories offer.
I am not in danger, Skylar. I am the danger.
My real issue, however, is not so much that these stories provide the occasional fantasy about being freed from the constraints of everyday life, or about being cooler than you really are. No, my concern is with how it can lead to value judgments that affect men's worldviews in a quietly insidious yet ultimately harmful way, one that I'm only now starting to truly recognize. For the myth of heroic masculine purpose is also an ideological concept. It doesn't just want to make you feel happy or fulfilled. It wants you to feel virtuous. It wants you, part 4, to feel righteous, but not about all the right things. During my 20s, I encountered and moved through a pretty wide variety of male-dominated social spaces, subcultures and philosophies that were in some way or another characterized by ideals of heroic masculine purpose. If you're watching this video, I'm sure you've come across it too. You know, the new manhood of proactive action taking, of grand ambitions, workout routines, productivity improvement, motivational speeches, financial freedom and overall purposeful living. And I'm not going to deny that all of this had a positive influence on me. It inspired me to go to the gym and take care of my body. It emboldened me to think bigger and more ambitiously. In fact, this entire channel probably wouldn't have existed if I hadn't imagined some kind of heroic masculine purpose for myself. If I hadn't pushed myself beyond the limits of the kind of life that I would have fallen into otherwise. A life that would not have been bad, but that definitely would not have allowed me to pursue my passions and express myself as I'm able to do now. So, you might be wondering, what's the problem here? Well, as I've said, there is an ideological aspect lurking beneath the surface here. Just take another look at some of those earlier mentioned quotes from The Way of the Superior Man. Like, if a man prioritizes his relationship over his highest purpose, he weakens himself. Or, without knowing his life purpose, a man lives a weakened, impotent existence. There's this subtle implication here that following a man's heroic purpose is not just a lifestyle decision. No, it is also a moral choice.
Tony, we have to take a stand.
We see this clearly with Tony Stark too, who at one point could have chosen to be a family man. But as the story suggests, this not only would have left him unfulfilled and, using Data's language, weakened, it would also have resulted in a lesser world. In other words, it is heavily suggested that, in the end, pursuing your heroic masculine purpose is not just fun or desirable, it is righteous. It benefits not just you, but everyone around you as well. And what this does, and what makes this whole thing such a tricky subject, is that it intertwines altruistic philosophy with what is essentially a self-help concept. It combines servitude with self-actualization. Now, these things aren't necessarily contradictions and can go hand in hand. I'll come back to that later. But there is a fine line between heroic purpose and grandiosity. between serving others and serving yourself. One that feels like it has gotten increasingly blurry. For even though over the last years I've seen a growing interest among men in being responsible, making sacrifices, and living a purposeful life for the good of the world, I've also seen that language of real virtue being co-opted for self-serving pursuits and self-righteous justifications. I've seen responsibility being turned into mere discipline to chase after one's own interests, and sacrifice coming to mean denying pleasure now to receive more pleasure later. I've seen countless men claim they are working hard to help others, to add value to the world, while primarily enriching themselves. I've seen men embrace the detachment of heroic masculine purpose not because they have completely devoted themselves to serving their society, but because they are harboring a disdain for it and just want to escape from it. I've seen the rise of the male-dominated financial independence retire early movement and of the men going their own way community. I've seen men being disproportionately hostile towards characters in stories, especially female characters, who try to get men to assume responsibility in the real world, instead of only in their parallel one where they can live out their heroic masculine purpose. More than ever, I've seen supposedly virtuous men withdrawing from society, instead of connecting closer to it. And at this point in the video, you have to bring in your own active self-reflection and ask yourself to what extent and in what ways all this applies to your life. I know this is easier said than done, and it's especially hard to take a critical look in the mirror when you don't feel like you're just doing the thing you desire, but when you feel like you're doing the thing that is right. I know this because I've been trying to do so myself, and as such, this video is not so much a critique of heroic stories, nor an indictment of the men who watch them. No, perhaps above all, it is a confession. Part 5. I let Aragorn down, and maybe you did too. When I was a university student and living on my own for the first time, like many others, I went through what I'd call a benign period of self-centeredness, a period of self-discovery. Naturally, the myth of heroic masculine purpose resonated with me a lot, as back then I had no real responsibilities. You know, I was single and free, I had all the time in the world to contemplate ideals of grand purpose and heroic virtues, to envision myself as someone who was righteous and ready to dedicate himself completely to a greater cause. And the more I saw this myth of heroic masculine purpose repeated over and over again, in books and in stories, the more I internalized it.
We all believe we'd run into the burning building, but until we feel that heat, we can never know.
Now, although I won't argue that it hasn't made me an overall better person, because I believe it definitely has, at some point I also started to embrace ideals of high virtue and grand purpose to the point where I became convinced, albeit on an unconscious level, that there was some exceptional heroic quality to my being. I won't deny there is some part of me that still believes that still wants to believe that. I think we all do. But at the same time, over the years, I also cannot deny how this faith in my own virtue had crossed over into convictions of self-importance. That while I was pursuing grand morality in my mind, I also grew detached from the little things, the real things, in my immediate environment, which in turn led to me failing to act when it actually mattered. I watched heroes dedicate themselves to the service of others, and yet I wasn't always there for the people around me. I've denied helping them, or did so with great reluctance, even if it was in some small, seemingly insignificant way. In fact, it was especially when it was in some small, insignificant way that there was a good chance that I didn't want to be bothered. I would tell myself, well, if everyone would ask me for such small favors, surely they'd stack up and I wouldn't get anything meaningful done. Or I would see the situation as just being too small to be truly demanding of my heroism. You know, I'll act when it really matters, when there are real stakes involved. Of course, such a moment never really came. More often than not, the truth was that it was just inconvenient, and that I was simply being lazy and selfish. And it took me way too long to realize that's not how real virtue works. Sure, it is true that some degree of selfishness is necessary, and that you can do more good for others when you are in a stronger position yourself. But I wonder, where do such rationalizations become excuses? When are you selfish out of genuine self-protection? And when are you just selfish out of convenience? Especially in today's society, where we not only have come to live in such wealth and comfort, but also have come to conflate self-actualization with altruism. To what extent have we muddled the water of true morality? To what extent have we begun seeing the trivial as the essential, and subsequently grown to protect the convenient as if it were vital, and the selfish as if it were selfless? What does it even look like now to make a true sacrifice, to be truly committed to a community? There is a fine line between heroic purpose and grandiosity, between serving others and serving yourself. And where exactly it is drawn, I do not know. All I know is that I've definitely been on the wrong side of it.
Sometimes you don't see the line until you cross it. I crossed it. I know that now.
Maybe you're not supposed to be Spider-Man climbing those walls. That's why you keep falling. You always have a choice, Peter.
Right now I am 30 years old. I'm still fully dedicated to following my passion. I'm still making these videos, still running my own business. And there's a lot more to come that I'm really excited about. But I'm also in a relationship that demands my active engagement. I have rabbits to take care of. I have real bills to pay. A house to maintain, even though it's a rental. I have family ties and friends that need my attention. The point is that more and more I'm coming to truly realize that all these things are just as important too. That my life's purpose cannot be reduced to a singular effort. Or better yet, that a singular effort, even if it feels like my life's purpose, doesn't alleviate me from all the other responsibilities that arise from being a partner, a friend, a family member, and even from being part of a larger community, a citizen of a country, a human being on our planet. I feel like I'm only now starting to see the real meaning of the work of Viktor Frankl, who in one of my favorite books of all time argued that a man should not ask what the meaning of his life is, but that he must recognize that it is he who is asked, and that it is up to him to answer not in some definitive abstract cosmic sense, nor with some heroic masculine purpose, but continuously, in the small, seemingly insignificant ways, every day. For Frankl, the quest for meaning is made up of a series of concrete assignments demanding concrete fulfillment. Not one but a multitude of purposes, found not within as some vaguely defined masculine essence or gift at the core of a man's being, but outside of oneself.
Any human being is concerned with something out there in the world, is concerned with someone out there in the world.
There are, of course, countless of stories that depict this kind of purpose and responsibility. And as I grow older, I find myself increasingly drawn to them.
We have a job to do.
You'll do it, because it must be done.
Stories that show that taking responsibility and making sacrifices for the good of others doesn't always feel rewarding or inspiring.
You live in my house, fill your belly with my food, because it's my duty to take care of you. I owe a responsibility to you.
Whatever happens to you is my fault. I haven't made a single choice for myself since I met you. I was just supposed to watch you.
Most of the time it simply means to genuinely offer up a piece of yourself, even if it is in some small, seemingly insignificant way. And there's a good chance it is asked of you when it is least convenient, when you stand nothing to gain, when there's no real glory in it and your name won't be remembered for it. But that might just be when it matters the most. Because it's in these acts that you demonstrate that you are not an island, that you do not exist on your own. And isn't that what true responsibility comes down to? The acceptance of your place in a greater whole, of your inherent embeddedness within a complex web of relations and connections.
Whatever comes our way, whatever battle we have raging inside us, we always have a choice.
As for the stories of all those larger-than-life heroic men, I still enjoy them. They still represent, albeit through metaphor, qualities and virtues that I believe are worth aspiring to. But now, when I look for true inspiration in such mythical form, more than ever, I think back to another story. Because long before I saw James Bond, Iron Man, and The Dark Knight, there was my great childhood hero, Aragorn. A man who embodied those same qualities and virtues, perhaps even better than anyone else. But above all, he was a man whose heroic quest, whose grand purpose, ultimately led him not towards exile, nor towards death by sacrifice, but towards an act of true commitment, towards a life of real responsibility and of everlasting purpose.
Let us together rebuild this world, that we may share in the days of peace.
Hey there, I hope this video was as interesting for you to watch as it was for me to create. As you could probably tell, spending a lot of time on these issues has genuinely changed my outlook on life a little bit. Or at the very least, refocused it a bit. If anything, it gave me a renewed appreciation for certain types of stories, most notably detective stories. I already mentioned True Detective as a solid de-romanticization of the myth of heroic masculine purpose. But I find the entire genre is worth studying, as it tends to more honestly depict the struggle of pursuing a meaningful yet stressful and at times isolating vocation, while having to maintain your connection to your family, your friends and your humanity as a whole. Which brings me to today's sponsor, Acorn TV. Acorn TV is a streaming service with captivating crime drama, mystery and thriller series from Britain and beyond. So if you're looking for a solid supply of detective stories, look no further. You can watch everything completely commercial free on all of your devices, with new content arriving every Monday. And all this for just $5.99 a month. If you want to try it out, you can go to acorn.tv and use the promo code like Stories of Old to get 30 days for free. So just follow the link in the description and start your month of great television today.